What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Noizze Podcast, brought to you by the Noizze Podcast Network and sponsored by Stereo Brain Records. I am your host, / your boy, Chris Pugh, as ever, and I am joined by my very good friend and Mr. Cynical himself, Samuel Lewis. Mate, on this fine Friday evening, how are we?
We're very well. We're very glad that it's a Friday evening, my friend. How are you?
I'm really good. I'm halfway through Scarface. I've never seen Scarface before, strangely. Like at this point in my life, I'm pretty much 30 years old now. Gun to my head there. I'm pretty much 30 years old there. And this is the first evening I've ever watched Scarface. So me and Kath have just watched about half of it. And I've just paused it to do this podcast. And I've got to say, I'm really into it. Although, you know how there's an obsession with Tommy Shelby by like kind of working to middle class white males in the 21st century. I can
Yeah.
only imagine what the hype around Tony Montana was like in the 80s. I mean, like I just imagine like that he kind of inspired a group of males that really have nothing in common with him and really have no chance of ever becoming anything like him to kind of act like him for no reason just because I think he's cool. Do you know what I'm getting at there, like with the Tommy Shelby thing?
Yes, I do. I can imagine that there were scores of guys that bought Hawaiian shirts and started
Yeah,
smoking
and like open the
cigarettes,
collars out like really wide for no real reason, and they
and
didn't
then
even
just
have a
started
chest to.
being, but like didn't have the balls to deal drugs, so they just started being overly aggressive to like people that sold them sandwiches,
And
and
using words like Maine for no reason.
yeah, or just like getting really aggressive in just like perfectly normal scenarios. So it's just like you're just being really aggressive to a train conductor for no reason. Um, I like that we opened with an attack on this bullshit fake Sigma male thing that's going on the internet, like smoking roll-ups and wearing a hat means that you can pretend that you're in a gang. It's just absolutely ridiculous. It's like when we started the internet memes really did begin, and it was like a picture of Rihanna and some generic like self-affirming don't let the haters in kind of meme
Yeah, yeah.
when people are sharing it as if like A, Rihanna said it, and B, Rihanna said it about your exact scenario. Like I'm sure Darren will text back eventually. I don't think we need to get pop stars into this really.
Oh, like, and the idea of like where like it would to be talking about roaming better on your own. It's better if you believe in yourself. And there's like a random picture of a lion there for no reason. It's like,
Oh
what's
God.
this lion got to do with this?
It's always one of like four pictures. It's Tommy Shelby. They're all smoking.
Yeah,
Uh,
Tom Hardy's usually used as well. Tom Hardy's another big one.
Legend in the back of the car, just like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Just like if she interrupts your peace, then she is not worth it. You fucking slag. It's just that type of stuff in the back, in the background. I'm scared already of the stills that are coming out from Oppenheimer, which is a thinner,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
gaunt Cillian Murphy, who again obviously smokes. I just there's going to be things like I've overcome things that you could never possibly understand. Be kind always, and then next to the guy that invented the nuclear bomb. Like it's just going to be so absurd. Every day we stray further from God. Like
Man,
just
I love Cillian Murphy and I love Al Pacino, but sometimes you got to ask, was this good for society?
you
And I'm
wonder
not
you
sure
wonder
whether
to yourself at this point halfway through Scarface. So when's he get the scar? What's that all about?
I'm not sure whether Al Pacino and Cillian Murphy's portrayals of Tony Montana and Tommy Shelby are good for society, regardless of how much I might enjoy them. Um, we should tell you who we are because this is getting ridiculous quick. We are the Noise Podcast. We are a rock and metal show. We usually come to you at least once every fortnight with a record of particular interest to us, as you've seen by the title of this episode. Today, we're talking about Currents, The Death We Seek. There's been plenty more going on around the channel over the past couple of weeks and in the future as well. We have got reviews on the new Unearth album coming up as well. We've also got reviews based on, depending on, I am looking at my time schedule here. I'm going to do my best to chat about the new Enforced record as well, because that's something I would like to discuss on the channel. But the best way, if you can support us, is by liking / subscribing on YouTube. The best thing you could do as well is follow us on Twitter at Noizze Podcast or at Noizze UK if you want to follow the general website handle. That would be a fantastic way to help us. We're available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, we will be there. And just to reiterate, the best way to support us is by liking, subscribing, following, based on whichever service you are using. Sam, as always, let's get straight into this here. So, Currents, The Death We Seek is out on May 5th via SharpTone Records. It is Currents' third full-length studio record and the follow-up to 2020's The Way It Ends. Sam, let's just open with this, really. I mean, I've just been a massive purveyor of Currents since I first discovered them, just before the Way Ends era. I mainly found out about them because I've got a strong adoration for SharpTone and the bands on their roster. I had a look at the bands on their roster and I thought, oh, Currents is one I've not heard. And as soon as I checked them out, I listened to the I Let the Devil In EP and I was like, yep, this is a band for me. This is absolutely a band that do exactly the things I want them to do with metalcore. And, let's just kind of speak with that for a second, because Currents are a metalcore band, or I'd say a modern metalcore band, at a time where they are swinging punches with the likes of Polaris, Invent, Animate, Make Them Suffer would be another band that I'd say they share similarities to. In some vague minor sense, I might also mention like Alpha Wolf as well in terms of the production of the record, not in terms of the hardcore sound, but in terms of areas of the way the records are produced. So Currents are, like, for me, at the forefront of modern metalcore. I'd say that kind of, it's unquestionable, really. And I thought The Way It Ends was a great record. It was up in my album of the year top 10, I believe, for 2020. I know that you were somewhat of a fan, but I don't ever really remember you talking to me about Currents in great interest or detail. Was it the kind of situation where you liked them when I played them, but had no desire to have a personal interest?
I really like the last record, the 2020 album, which
The Way
was
It
The Way
Ends.
It Ends. Yeah, big
Yeah.
fan of that. Poverty of Self and A Flag to Wave, just brilliant songs.
Yeah, let's go.
Brilliant metalcore. Really like the vocals. I like the harsh, kind of throaty sound of the vocalist. He always sounds like he's just about to lose his voice, and I just think it gives a good different kind of edge to the melodic section. And the guitar work is really great. They've never progressed beyond very good for my subjective taste. I've never sat down and thought of them the way that I think about a band like Malevolence, for example, just like a massive metal band that I'm really into, or even Alpha Wolf. For me, they sit on a sort of secondary, very good metalcore band tier that I would now put like August Burns Red after their last record on. They're kind of on that sort of par as well for me. I think they're really good, but yeah, I don't think they've transcended to great. From my personal taste.
So just as we get into the album then, Sam, let me ask you this then. Would you take this over Polaris's last record? Would you take The Death We Seek over the last Polaris album?
Oh, that's a close one.
Because I think Polaris are probably the band that are closest to Currents in terms of quality of output, in my opinion.
I hmm, I know that you want a straight answer, but if I can equivocate for just a second.
No, you must give me a straight answer and nothing but.
I would say that this album did not excite me the way that Polaris's album excited me at the time. I remember being obsessed with it when
Yeah.
I first heard it, and this didn't have that kind of impact on me. However, looking at it with more an objective eye, I would say that this has more depth and intertextuality and a deeper songwriting, deeper sense of songwriting variety, I guess, for want of a better phrase. Polaris, it's like Polaris did exactly what I want a metalcore album to do.
Yeah.
To like the nth degree. The recipe was absolutely perfect. I might as well have had my name on it. But I can appreciate that Currents do more, objectively speaking, even though it's perhaps not exactly to what I would like. So, I'm just for full disclosure, I'm a massive purveyor to use your word, of technical guitar-led metalcore.
Yes.
Big Finneas guy, big Polaris guy. My favorite parts of metalcore albums are like the high-pitched breakdowns with the sort of lead running over the top, guitar solos, harmonies, things like that. So just for full disclosure, whereas I think Currents don't quite sit in that super technical metalcore role, but they flit into it, and that's why I enjoyed this tremendously because it flitted in enough for me. But what I will say is that this is probably a better album for its versatility and depth than Polaris's record, even though Polaris is probably more aligned to my tastes.
Interesting. I thought you might stick to your guns and stick with Polaris there, but I think before we start talking about the song, Sam, I know that me, you, and Leon, our co-best friend, talk about and quite laugh about my obsession with Chris Wiseman, but just non-satirically,
Sometimes you
I'm,
shout his name
randomly,
like he's
yeah,
a
I just think
wrestler
he's
that's a
amazing.
beard.
I
Oh
just
my
think he's
god, that's
amazing.
Chris Wiseman's music.
But Sam, seriously, I'm going to assume that the difference maker for you that would nudge Currents just above Polaris is Chris Wiseman. I'm just going to assume he's the reason, Sam.
Yeah, he's the best member of the band.
Yeah, he's the best
Yeah.
member of the band in a band where they've got Brian Weil, who's a fantastic vocalist as well.
Yes.
So yeah, like me, you, and Leon might take the mick out about my obsession with Chris Wiseman, but for me, he's the strongest cog that moves Currents towards being at the forefront of modern metalcore. So I'm going to talk about
That's
that in
fair to
more
say.
detail. We're going to talk about that in more detail. I've got no doubt. So as we speak, The Death We Seek, So Alone, Remember Me, and Vengeance are the singles, so we won't discuss those because if you're a big Currents fan, which I'm assuming you are if you're here, you've already heard those and you can go and listen to them right now. So Sam, I'll hand over to you to talk about Living in Tragedy or Unfamiliar, whichever one of those two you'd like. So before you begin, sorry, I love this album. I think this album's amazing, and it's probably my favorite album of the year so far. I think this is incredible. I think Currents have outdone themselves, and I believe, as we speak, modern metalcore Currents are the best band after this album in modern metalcore. I just want to make that opening. I made that my opening statement in case anyone was curious what I actually think.
And to
Sam, the floor is
conclude,
yours.
I'm going to uplift my shirt which says "I love Chris Wiseman" on my chest.
Sam, I'm going to hand over to you, mate.
This is a great metalcore record. It's a great metalcore record. It does everything that you're gonna want from a metalcore standpoint. But I don't even want to talk about it from a metalcore standpoint. I want to talk about the fact that this band has deliberately taken steps forward in the songwriting and deliberately
100%.
taken steps forward in the musicality and the use of
Yep.
different instruments and the
Yep.
expansion of the vocals and the
Yep.
depth of the melody. And the songwriting is better. It's less formulaic. It's less predictable.
Yep.
So let's just, for the purposes of keeping it interesting, you're a Currents fan listening. Chris thinks it's the best metalcore album of the year, probably the best album of the year so far. I think it's a great metalcore record, and let's just both agree that it contains everything that a metalcore album should, and then put that to one side because I just want to talk about the other stuff. Because the other
Sounds
stuff is
great. Yep.
the other stuff what differentiates it here. Um,
Yeah, I'm curious what the
what?
details of your differentiation comments will be because I've got a few that I've thought of, and I'm curious if we align. So sorry if I interrupted there.
No, no,
Please
not at
go ahead.
all. Not at all. Obviously we'll go in sort of like chronological sections. So I'll leave the thoughts of the second half of the album for when we get round to that. So we'll just start at the earlier sections. The
Yeah,
things that set this album apart from the opening two songs, "Living in Tragedy" and "Unfamiliar," which I'd like to start with "Living in Tragedy." For a start, the band, after writing a great opening which follows all of the Currents tropes in "The Death We See," which is a terrific opener,
amazing.
kicks. If you're looking for reassurance, you find it immediately in "The Death We Seek," and then we move on to "Living in Tragedy." That's got a four to the floor, stomping, methodical riff that I'm not sure Currents would have not settled for is the right idea, but opted as an introduction feels like actual musical change for them. But the section that's very, very interesting is an electronic section before the verse arrives in "Living in Tragedy." Just a hint of a synth, and it's the foreshadowing of things to come a little bit later. And on top of that, the chorus is great, but what they do later in the song is they rotate the screaming and the harsh singing towards each other and they intertwine rather than it being separate dueling banjos, your turn, my turn type stuff. There's an integration, and I thought that was really, really nice. There's an increase in tension before a slower breakdown. There's a What's noticeable here is a juxtaposing heaviness between the off notes, the stab chords. There's a growl and it comes back nice and circular with the main riff returning again with that beat coming back. And there's a lot of stuff here where percussion is used as a songwriting motif, where it's circular and it returns back to that rhythmic pattern that we saw at the start. And bottom line, Chris, as much as you like Chris Wiseman, as much as you like Currents, it's probably fair to say that they followed a blueprint on their last record in 2020 that they have not that they have abandoned to a certain degree here, or at the very least they've adapted and changed. And Living in Tragedy is the first indicator that this album is a step forward for the band from a songwriting standpoint, and a welcome addition of depth and colour, a widening of the palette, so to speak. And that is very clear on this song, that contains enough of the metalcore tropes that maintain your kinship with the band if you are interested in that specifically, while also widening out its perspective with these other elements. I'm so used to metalcore being a turn-taking environment for bands that when that's abandoned, I find that very exciting, because it shows the songwriters are not seeing a song as a collection of bricks that just sort of go in a formulaic order. They see a genuine sort of serpentine meshing together of ideas. And when that starts happening, then you unlock all these other doors. Then you start looking into what really talented bands are starting to put together, which sounds like the last August Burns Red record, the sort of stuff that Periphery do to a lesser degree. And that's a really exciting start for me. So I think Living in Tragedy is one of the first real examples to me where the band are going beyond what we'd expect from them after their last record.
Wanted to point out on the end of that, Sam, that Living in Tragedy might be the heaviest song Currents have ever written.
Oh, interesting. I don't think so. I think there are heavier songs on this album.
Oh, really, mate? That ending 40 seconds?
Yeah, nasty as hell. But do you not think? Do you think it's heavier than Vengeance? Do you think it's heavier than the last minute and a half of Beyond the Road? Beyond this road?
Those final 40 seconds, mate, I really feel like are up there with the most punishing 40 seconds I've ever heard from Currents.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that it's comparable. But I think as a clear winner, I'm not sure.
Interesting. I'd be curious how to see how that lies. I mean, I suppose really it's tomato, really, that we're discussing here. Like, which one's heavier? Well, I think this one's heavier. No, I think this one's heavier.
This is like a Reddit's comment section. This is like no one's doing this.
Tommy Shelby's turned up. Tom Hardy, Tony Montana. They were debating breakdown heaviness. What have we become? What have we become? No, the comments you made there about the idea of Currents like breaking out and kind of flexing and fledging their wings into something more fully developed and something more expansive. I totally agree. And that appears quite a lot, actually, throughout this album, which I wouldn't have expected. Like, the first time I heard The Death We Seek, the title track, first of all, I was like, this is amazing. But I fully expected that would be by far the most open and expansive and kind of infectious track on the album, hence it being selected first. It's actually not the case. I'm delighted to report. I actually think that The Death We Seek, the title track, there's a few songs on this album that are better than it. Not many, because that song is incredible, but there's a few songs that are better than it. In terms of Unfamiliar, look at this gorgeous bending guitar work from Chris Wiseman. Even with Brian in the band, we mentioned this. I think Chris is the heart and soul of Currents. Opens up with this kind of twisting guitar line. The chorus is an example of why I think Currents are ahead of most of the bands in modern metalcore, and they do have a chance of really becoming the flagship modern metalcore band. I do feel in the same way that Knocked Loose are the flagship modern hardcore band. They've got this lovable, infectious chorus that kind of draws you in. But then it's so clever how they write like this. The chorus then wraps itself around these spellbinding riffs from Chris and Ryan, the lead and rhythm guitarists. It's just this phenomenal apex modern metalcore track. There's a huge monolithic closing breakdown that just throws itself into your face out of nowhere as well. It's a superb way to conclude. And if you think about it, Sam, we've got the title track, Living in Tragedy, Unfamiliar, and So Alone as the quadrant that open this album. Not bad, is it? because
No, no, it's a strong opening.
that is a solid quadrant of songs to hit you from the outset on this album. I think this album starts strong, Sam, and I don't think it ever really wavers. I feel like this stays at a consistent great level throughout. Personally, I didn't feel any dips in this album.
No, no, I think it at the very least sort of stays in third gear. I thought Vengeance, that even though it was chosen as a single, it felt like a very run-of-the-mill current song in comparison to some
Yeah,
of the others.
yeah, that one is expectation, bread butter stuff. Yeah, that's possibly the one where if it wasn't a single, we'd fully discuss it. But that possibly is the one where it's right, yeah, more of this. That's cool. But
Yeah, essentially.
everywhere else, there's a huge hook that just draws you in, just literally littered across the entire album.
I would agree with that. I think when I first listened to the album, I felt that the opening four songs, like you mentioned, was the strongest part of it. I listened to it again today, and I actually thought the last three songs were my favorite sections of the album. And I think that that's actually taking place. It gives an indication of what you're referring to there, where it's a extension of quality. And you're right, doesn't appear to rely on singles to carry the whole album through. It has a real sense of depth and a real sense of strength. If we ignore So Alone because the single, as we mentioned, which by the way is an incredible song,
That's
um,
amazing. I love the chorus on that.
absolutely. And you talk about Over and Over, and Beyond This Road. The opening riff on there is just fantastic with the juxtaposition of the high pitched and then the lower rhythmic stuff in the opening riff is just phenomenal. And the fact that it changes pace, but also then manages to use the clean riff as like a repeating motif. I'm in love with. And then Beyond This Road, the rollicking start was like, oh, this is what Wage War want to sound like.
Yeah,
Like if they were like
yeah.
really, really, really good. Um, no offense to Wage War, they're a good band. Which has classic top tier. This is what a metal. This is like a model paragraph for what a great metalcore song starts like. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just a perfect example. And like I said, this is the argument that I would have had with you, where it's like I feel that the second half of this is as heavy as they sound on this entire record, and they're able to just drop this in the center of the album prior to Vengeance, and then we'll obviously discuss the second half of the album in due course. But I think the last three songs are just phenomenal as well.
But I wanted to mention about Over and Over because listening to Over and Over is where I realised what it is that makes Currents just better than most bands in their stratosphere. On Over and Over, and they do this better than almost any band I can think of, not just in the metalcore sphere, just in alternative music in general. In the chorus of Over and Over, they use these dual layer of
Mm.
screams and melodic vocals, and the screams sit underneath Brian's mix as he's doing the melodic vocals. Not really something they could replicate live for obvious reasons, but it sounds
Yes,
incredible.
yes,
It
it's a
sounds
really class.
unbelievable. When the screams run just underneath the
You can
melody.
do that. That can
Oh
play
my
that. That
god!
can play that over the PR.
I
That could
suppose
just.
they could play it over the PA, but I'm not sure I'm not sure how pretentious they are about. No, we only want to play what we can play. Do you know what I mean? Do you know
Mm.
it's something I'd imagine Periphery would say like, no, we're not going to play the PA. We're going to play what we play. But. So I'm not sure whether currency that's something that they'd choose to do. Obviously, it's not something they could naturally do. They would need to play it through the system. Regardless, it's what makes them stand out for me. It sounds amazing. The chorus on Over and Over. I must have listened to it like 6 times in a row. I was like, the way they're doing this is incredible, and that's not even mentioning the riff and instrumental work that goes behind Over and Over, which of course is superb. You mentioned Beyond This Road, which I think has the tonality and structure of a track you'd have found on The Place I Feel Safest, which is Current's first full length record. But the progression they've made just kind of slaps you across the face because once they break away from the chorus, there's a little mini unpredictable punished instrumental that gets those piercing, stabbing guitar lines and growls in and then reverts back into the chorus line. And just these little tricks and flicks and switches that Currents use that that makes them just phenomenal to listen to as a metalcore fan. I wanted to quickly talk about Gone Astray, Sam, in the sense that I think that something clicked for me when listening to Gone Astray, that I realised that actually this sounds like a negative, and just stick with me because I'm going to make it particularly clear what I mean by this. This record does utilise a blueprint and the same tricks and kind of rearranges it into different forms, pretty much. Technical riff, fluctuating riff patterns, skyscraping chorus, possible breakdown, heart to the floor drums. But the reason that's not a problem is because Currents are so good at writing in this style that every song somehow feels fresh, unique within itself. There's always some huge infectious chorus. There's always some stargazing riff that Chris Wiseman's going to drop out. There's always this slamming breakdown that appears literally like a wave out of nowhere. This record isn't this expansive, creative, genre-bending piece of music. But what it is, it's just phenomenal at what it does. And me and you often criticise albums that stick at a similar pace or pull the same trick off. What I realise, Sam, is pulling the same trick off isn't a problem if you're really good at it. If you're really, really good at it. Unlike Beartooth, who aren't really good at the trick they try and pull off. They're good at doing it once or twice. Currents are amazing at doing the trick. They're phenomenal at writing songs that fit within that blueprint.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's like my dad says, like writing the same albums over and over again, he's all right if you're AC/DC or the Ramones, because you're
Yeah.
AC/DC or the Ramones.
Yeah.
But it's now good if you're other bands. I wanted to sort of conclude my thoughts by agreeing with that. I think Gone Astray was the first song where I really felt that, oh my God, they're going a little bit further than they're typically used to. The synth for the
Yeah.
opening, use of the piano as part of the breakdown. Can we talk a little bit about Guide of Sound? Because I think this is the best song on the album.
That's interesting. You go for it. Not one that I choose as the best, but it's a beautiful song, mate. Let's go.
Yeah.
See, the floor is yours.
It's like that Bernie Sanders meme where it's like, I am once again telling you that I love the last song on any album. Because here's what
Yeah.
seems to happen. Because what tends to be is the last song seems to be the one where they like, all right, let's make it a little softer with a big guitar solo in, and I'm just like, yeah, that's my favorite. I like it when you do that. But the melodic open, I think, is beautiful. The mix of piano, I think the vocals here, the combining the melodic vocals and the chorus with a breakdown, that was so clever. Where they continued the chorus, but they changed the backing behind it with the breakdown riffs, and they changed the tempo entirely, and it just led beautifully into this solo that was the for Chris Wiseman, the temptation for many metal guitarists is I'll just play as fast as possible all the time. I love that he does this thing at the start of his guitar solos where he repeats a melody, repeats a figure from earlier, repeats something in the key of the chorus, and then allows it to run right back into the actual, like, the fast-paced stuff that really elicits the pace of the whole song as well. I think it's a beautiful song, and I think it's really impressive. And this last trio of songs at the conclusion of the record is the moment where I felt that this was taking larger steps beyond its genre and what it was, what I expected of it going into the album. It caps off an incredible record.
I think that's a fantastic place for us to wrap this up. To be honest, Sam, I think Currents here have really reached new ground, not in terms of sonically, not in terms of pushing themselves creatively, but I think Currents have gone from a very good metalcore band, in my opinion, to be one of the great modern metalcore bands of our generation that we've got running at the moment. I would be very surprised if I stumbled across a metalcore album that I prefer to this metalcore album. I'm not saying it's going to be my album of the year, but what I would say is it's going to be up there, and I'll be surprised if I hear a metalcore album better than it. Just to close off, pure curiosity for me, are you taking this over August Burns Red?
God, it's going to be a fight. It's going to be a fight to the death, in which my final decision will be made about 2 days before our album of the year podcast.
Well, that in itself tells me everything that I need to know, because you adored, as did I, that August Burns Red album. And we were just so happy that this band that we'd kind of written off that would just be 7 out of 10 for the rest of their career actually turned up with like an 8.5 / possibly 9 out of 10. right when you didn't expect it. That's where we're going to leave off this episode of the Noizze Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Please listen to The Death We Seek on the 5th of May by Current. It is truly, truly phenomenal. You can follow us on Twitter at Noizze Podcast / at Noizze UK. Please subscribe / like / follow, depending on whichever service you are using. There is loads more content coming your way. We've got reviews on Unearth, Enforced, depending on time on my hands. We've got review on Veil of Mayer's new album coming up as well. So podcast is going to be busy. Please subscribe and support us. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy The Death We Seek by Current on the 5th of May. It is a truly phenomenal album. Thank you for listening. We love you. Bye.